Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our HNIP webinar, a topic that we've not talked too much about for a while. We're looking back over some of the projects that have received HNIP funding and looking forward a little bit in terms of how those networks are going to continue to grow and expand and some of the lessons that can be learnt from them. We're focusing today on projects in the north of England. And before I hand over to our fantastic lineup of speakers, I just wanted to cover off some housekeeping. So Sasha, if you could jump to the next slide, thank you. So the session today is being recorded. The slides and the recording will be available after the session. If you could turn off your camera if you're not speaking, that would be fantastic, apart from our designated speakers. It would just help with bandwidth, because we're expecting quite a large number of people to join today. If you have any comments on anything that's discussed during the session, feel free to pop those into the chat. It's really great to get a bit of conversation and discussion going. And if you have a question for our speakers, you can put those into the Q&A or type them into the chat. I'll be monitoring both of those, and we have sufficient time at the end to cover those questions off. Hopefully we'll get through all of them. If we don't, we'll take them away and we'll come back separately with a follow-up email. If there's a discussion going on as part of the Q&A, feel free to raise your hand. This is a normal Teams meeting, and we're keen to sort of encourage debate and share learnings throughout the session. So I will hand over to Amy from Triple Point, and over to you.
Perfect, thanks Sam. Hi everyone. Sasha, did you just want to pop over to the next slide? Thank you. So yes, as Sam said, thank you again for joining us all today. My name is Amy and I'm a relationship manager for Triple Point. I'm currently working on the Green Heat Network Fund, which some of you might have already heard about, but I did actually join Triple Point back in 2019 it was, so just coming up to 5 years, and we had just launched the Heat Networks investment project, and I actually had the pleasure of supporting all 3 of these projects, so I was able to give them the good news of the funding. So what was HNIP? Well, it was a major government scheme which provided funding for heat network projects up till March 2022. Both the pilot and the main scheme invested up to £320 million for projects across England and Wales. And as I just mentioned, this scheme was succeeded by the Green Heat Network Fund, and that is also now currently open for applications. So one of the key aims of HNIP was to create a self-sustaining heat network market. It's obviously had its challenges along the way. We've had to manage some things such as Brexit and COVID, but despite those obstacles, it has without a doubt increased the number of the number of strategic low carbon heat networks across the UK. It's also demonstrated that heat networks have the ability to meet consumer needs. I personally have seen it boost the supply chain and the capabilities in the sector just through my interactions with the projects and players in the market over the last few years. Sasha, did you just want to pop to the next slide? Thank you. So the scheme was launched, as I said, in 2019. This was actually before the government committed to their net zero targets, and we hope it will play a significant role as we continue to work towards 2050. Around £270 million has been offered to eligible projects under the main scheme, and to the right, that map just shows a few of the funded projects across the country. Total capex of schemes funded is more than £700 million, and this is across public and private sector projects. We also hope that once fully built out, these projects will supply low carbon heat to more than 75,000 residential connections. The projects funded under HNIP, often represented a first initial phase of work. So actually within the backdrop of zoning and all of that work that's around the corner, we expect these projects, and we know that they will expand into citywide networks that are capable of moving the dial on the scale of heat networks in the UK. Next slide, please, Sasha. As well as direct funding, the HNIP has helped to professionalise the market. Many of you might have heard and also engaged with the Beehive. So this was actually launched under the previous Department of Bays. The Beehive is a DPS platform for public sector partners, public sector projects to procure funding from a range of investors and also funding related services. This is currently running until March 2025 and can be used independently of any applications to funding. We've also created and issued resources to help project sponsors understand funder requirements. So when it comes to due diligence, helping them to demonstrate that their projects meet the minimum requirements and ultimately allow them to have greater certainty of what an investable project could look like. We also issued a series of heat contract templates. I know a lot of the projects already have used these. These were created by our energy legal experts, LuxNova. They're now sort of best in class industry standard documentation for the starting point of contract negotiation and creation. More information about the Beehive and also both sets of these resources are on our website. I am going to hand over today to 3 projects. So we're hearing from Gateshead, Liverpool and Leeds. Sorry, Sasha, just pop to the next slide. Sorry. So yeah, 3 projects today from Gateshead, Liverpool and Leeds. And sorry, Sasha, do you want to just go back? This just showcases some of the technology types that we've funded under HNIP. So all of these, or quite a few of them actually, we should have some case studies on our website as well. So if any of the presentations inspire you or any of the projects that are listed there, if you'd like to talk with any of them or just find out a little bit more, then obviously please do get in touch. And I think now I will be able to hand over to Jim. So Sasha, you can go over to the next slide. Thank you. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Amy, and thanks all for letting me come and share our experiences. I'm the Service Director at Gateshead Council for Energy Design, also responsible for running Gateshead Energy Company. So next slide, please. So we've had a network in Gateshead since 2018, and this is the current extent of it. The green is what we built initially back in 2018, and we've just, using some PSDS funding, extended it down to the east on the blue there. So we've currently got about 5 kilometres, and if you do the next slide, please. We're up to about probably 23 customers on our network. We are both a heat and a power network because we started off using gas CHP as our main energy source, and we've always needed to then work out how we look to decarbonise as we expand. So those red ones there, they're the expansions that we've got where we've got HNIP funding to grow the network, as well as introducing some renewable heat to the network. So next slide, please. So we're lucky enough to have 2 HNIP projects currently. The first was largely to fund a mine water heat pump and also extensions to the network. And I should say, when we initially bid for the HNIP, it was to actually look at river source heat using the River Tyne. However, early in the feasibility phase of before we got into design, just liaising with the Coal Authority, it was maps like this that showed us we had a massive resource for mine heat underneath the town centre, which was a warmer temperature, closer and probably far lower cost than trying to tap in to the river, which got down to about 5 degrees in the winter. So if you next click, please, Sasha. You'll see here, this is some of the seams. We've got 6 worked seams underneath our feet, and that's what we found was key for mine water. You need multiple seams and multiple targets because you don't always get what you find. And so having a variety of sources is key to a successful mine water scheme. Next slide, please. So long story short, 2.5 years later, we now have an operational heat pump scheme, the largest mine water heat system in the country, composing 2 abstraction holes, 1 reinjection hole. We get a stable 15 degrees from our water, and at peak flows, we're using about 140 litres a second, which is about 2 bathtubs a second. And thanks to using a very efficient ammonia heat pump, we're achieving 80-degree flow temperature at decent COPs of 2.9. Next slide, please. We were fully operational by March 2023 last year, where we had all our permits in place from the Environment Agency, Coal Authority, and we submitted our final request to get the RHI banked, which is going through the final stages of approval now. Next slide, please. So this is effectively how the mine water scheme works. Thanks to colleagues at the Coal Authority for helping prepare this. And I should say we engaged the Coal Authority from the very start using their innovation team to really help with the mine water feasibility, then finding targets, and then we kept them on through design and construction because their expertise in drafting specifications for boreholes, tendering, managing the drillers. That's what's been a key success for our project, and I strongly recommend others to use their excellent sources going forward. So we have 2 abstraction holes from about 150 meters deep, which pull up the water at a constant 15 degrees. That's chilled down to about 8 or 9 degrees, and we put that back into the upper workings, and that keeps it separate from the lower workings. So we haven't seen our source temperature degrade over the last year and a half. The innovation we needed was the Coal Authority designed something they called a vent hole, which is that one called JC12, and that basically was new for mines, and it was new to the Environment Agency, but it's been fully permitted, and that basically helps us depressurize the lower workings to allow us to extract those high flow rates without seeing massive drawdowns in the mines, which is important. Next slide, please. So having built that, we're probably fortunate in Gateshead that we also have another 2 mine water heat pumps at a company called Lanchester Wines. And so this goes on to some of the social value that we're getting out of the scheme. Now, the Coal Authority have invested in extra monitoring boreholes between our 2 sites, because we're the only place in the country where there's more than 1 mine water heat pump. And that means they can then create geothermal models of the mines to then basically tell how many of these we can permit in an area. Next slide, please. So you won't be able to see this, but effectively this is the geology that we're pulling from. Our boreholes are on the left, Lanchester are in the grey areas on the right, and effectively now the Coal Authority and partners have got a working hydrological model, so that they can basically work out how many of these you can start permitting in given mine blocks. And so that should help really set the bar for how many permits the Coal Authority can release for other schemes elsewhere in the country, really helping the proliferation of these schemes. Next slide, please. So it's not just about heat, it's about connections as well. So this is one development. This is 270 homes new build, which are now fully on a heat network. And if you show us the next slide, we're starting to get those pipes in the ground. We've got about 45 properties connected so far. Again, using innovation in terms of bringing in twin pipe solutions. So this is a single carrier pipe with the flow and return inside. And we found that really helps get the dimensions down, because developers are used to a single gas pipe, and so they balked at having twin pipes going through their new development, and that's been helping. Next slide, please. You can see here again how we interface our installations with the general build. We have to follow their build program, and we like to be the first utility in, so that water and comms and power coming after us. But that's really worked well. We've taken the developers on a journey that will see that fully built out in the next 2 to 3 years. Next slide, please. The other key development that's being funded through HNIP is the Sage development, which is on Gateshead Quayside. The first phase will be a hotel and a conference centre where HNIP is supporting the heat connection. We're also providing power to those as well. And then in time, an arena will follow probably by 2028. And again, we've always had the capacity in our network to deliver a scheme like this, but HNIP's allowed us to take that through to be able to provide viable connection offers to these very commercial developments that are starting to help the regeneration of the borough. Next slide. And with that in mind, this is a snapshot of Gateshead Town Centre, and you can see on the left how we're integrating our energy generation assets, the existing energy centre and our mine water heat pump with redevelopment in some of our brownfield areas. And all of those noted there, they're customers in our network. And you can see there where location of the boreholes, how we've tucked them into some brownfield land that you can still develop around. And also it's linked to a new urban solar park that we were fortunate to get funding for. Next slide, please. So again, through PSDS, we were lucky enough to get some funding that's now installed that solar park that's providing green power to our private wire network, and often surplus power that allows us to run the heat pump. So next slide, please. So this has been a milestone year. Since we were operational with both systems from early in the year, we've started massively to see the percentage of renewables increase in our network. Power has topped almost 50% through the summer months. And renewables, while we've had some snagging issues, so we're not fully operational yet, but even with the lower outputs, we're still seeing the carbon content of heat coming down as well. And we're targeting probably about 30 to 35% of our heat will come from the mine water system when we're fully past that snagging. We still have a base load that needs to run on gas CHP, but it will grow over time. Next slide, please. The second project we've got is looking at how we take heat networks into social housing. When we look at the borough, we have 15,000 homes on low-rise social housing networks, and on paper, it's more cost-effective to look at heat networks as opposed to individual heat pumps. And so this project's been stalled because we've had to wait for construction inflation to calm down. We've had to wait for borrowing costs to calm down, but we're now through design stage, and we've got commitment to do a pilot where we'll test the first 16 homes to try and get us connected to the heat network. So next slide, please. These networks are costly, so we've had to really use some mentoring experience from our Danish colleagues to design them to minimise costs, minimise spurs, change the right material. Next slide, please. We've also worked with SAV, an HIU supplier, to develop an external kiosk, so the HIU goes on the outside of the property, massively reducing connection costs. Next slide. And also we're hoping to go down the route of trialling whether we can share an HIU between properties on a semi, which again further reduces cost. And all of these are needed to cope with the higher meterage you need for a network like this. Next slide. So that project will hopefully get into construction fully for the whole scheme, 500 homes by the autumn. But I think beyond HNIP, what we're seeing is with some of the capacity and efficiency we're getting, we never thought we'd be able to extend the network as far as this, but we're now able to look at taking the network down 3.5 kilometres to our nearby hospital. That's part of the PSDS bid that's just gone in. And the strategic importance of that, if you go to the next slide, is when we combine having the new heat source and hopefully proving concept for low-rise social housing networks, when we get to the hospital in the blue there, basically it's next to probably about 13 housing estates, totaling about 7,500 homes, and probably another 2,000 to 3,000 private homes interspersed within that. And that's the kind of scale we think we need to go at for our next heat networks. If you do the next slide, please. The reason for that is we're really pushing, trying to improve the supply chain and get much more local growth in jobs and skills to deliver the heat networks. We've got a great pipeline in the northeast, but some of the work we've done so far, even when we're doing 20 to 30 million pound schemes over 1 to 2 years, it's not sufficient for suppliers to invest in local gangs, local teams, local welders, local manufacturing to do that. For that, they need 5-year contracts plus, which is what they get from the utility companies. So we were fortunate to get some funding from Ener-Vate UK to do 3 things: to get communities on board with DH, to get the supply chain skilled up and ready for these bigger contracts, and to help us with the legal and financial structures we need to deliver at a much bigger scale and pace. Because we think if we achieve that, the cost of delivering will go down, but also will stimulate developing a regional supply chain for heat networks, which is only going to increase jobs, growth, skills. And for us, we think it's probably the best opportunity we've got for a green economy supply chain growing in both Gateshead and the North East region. So thank you very much. Last slide is my contact details if anyone wants to get in touch, and I'll stop there.
Great, thanks, Jim. We're handing over to George now from Leeds City Council.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. That's quite an act to follow. I think that the thing that strikes me about Gateshead is just how many different heat sources there are going into a single network, which just gives it a huge amount of resilience, which is something we're aiming to do in Leeds. So what I'm going to do today is just give a quick whistle-stop tour of what we've built in Leeds. Next slide, please. I'll look at what we've built, why we built it, have a look at the 3 phases of growth. I think we're unusual in that we built our first phase just prior to HNIP coming along. So I'll talk a bit about that and some lessons learned, and then talk a bit more about phases 2 and 3 with HNIP support and what we learned from those. And then just look to the future as well. What are we aiming to do over the next sort of 5, 10, 20 years? Next slide, please. So if we take a look at kind of why we got involved with district heating in the first place, it was predominantly because we had an opportunity that landed on us, that we had to get rid of our municipal waste. We needed to build an energy from waste plant. So we took the opportunity then to locate that energy from waste plant relatively close to the city centre, which meant that the waste wagons weren't disappearing off into the rural hinterland to drop off waste. They were right within the city centre, but critically it gave us that opportunity to bring in low carbon heat. The big thing we did was work really hard with our directors and with elected members just to get the message across about how much this is a kind of a win-win opportunity. There's a really clear political message about using spare heat from burning waste to keep vulnerable people warm. And that message really helped us to get the large investment over the line. Next slide, please. So in our phase one, we built everything you can see there in orange, which from memory was around about a 12-kilometre network, starting down in the bottom right hand at the energy from waste plant, running a transmission line about 3 kilometres long up to Saxton Gardens. So that was essentially a bridge, a large diameter pipe just to get the heat in towards the city centre. And then we had about 2,000 council flats that we connected as part of our initial phase one. Next slide, please. So in terms of the lessons that we learned from delivering that project, it was clear that there are circumstances where local authorities are best placed to lead and deliver heat networks. For this particular project, it didn't make financial sense because we planned to build a network that was oversized with all the key elements designed to take all the 20 megawatts of heat available from the energy waste plant and bring it into the city centre. But with only 2,000 flats as your key customers, it doesn't have a business case. So what we did, we worked with our members to present to them a number of kind of realistic scenarios, from kind of worst case to what we thought at the time might be a best case, and just got them comfortable that we could invest and using our planning powers and our convening powers, we would likely then bring a whole bunch more customers onto the network over time. But if you present that to the private sector, they'll say, fine, we believe you, but you're going to pay maybe 12, 13, 14% for the privilege of having a non-de-risked project. So we took the risk. We took the risk and believed that we could do it. It's also really important that you prepare ahead of district heating. So we spent a long time working with our planning colleagues. We developed a local development order, which just gave pipes permitted development rights, which made it much easier for us to lay the pipes. We had planning policy, which supported encouraged developments to connect. Already mentioned before, senior support, really important to get directors on board. We spent a huge amount of time talking to customers. From sort of 2013, 14, we were engaging with customers, and interestingly now, some of them are only just connecting, so it takes a long time to get some customers over the line. We did a huge amount working on the business case and putting funding applications together for a range of sources. We also learned that the procurement stage is incredibly important. We identified that if we were going to build a network, we had to have a really strong partner supporting us. So the way we felt we could achieve that was by using a procurement which was design, build, operate and maintain. So D&B is absolutely standard, but we added a 12-year O&M contract with 2 5-year extensions onto that. And the reason we did that was that by giving our winning bidder 22 years of operations, it just guarantees quality. They will build something that they are then highly motivated to want to operate. And we also built into that procurement the requirement to support us to strategically grow the network. And again, it just helped to make sure our interests aligned, that as the network grows, naturally Vital gets additional O&M costs coming through from delivering more heat to more customers. So bringing people together so that you're working as a team was absolutely critical. We also included within it a lot of social value targets. So we've helped to generate, I think, over almost 500 local jobs and dozens of apprenticeships, and delivered presentations to schools and colleges and a range of other sources. So it's really helped with the social value that we're all trying to deliver to our local areas. On the less positive, construction phase is hard. You never quite know what you're going to come across. And the critical thing there is having a good team that is working together with a really open and honest culture, so that where issues arise, then you work together to address those. So we deliberately use the NEC form of contract, which encourages the early warnings and the working together to rectify issues before they become major costs to the project. And then my final point is land. It's the single biggest risk. We had a very small amount of land we needed to cross with a gas pipe to connect into our energy centre. It ended up costing over £1 million in about 2 years to solve that particular problem. I'm not going into details, but I have the scars. So next slide, please. So then, having built the first phase of the network, we are highly motivated to grow. We knew we had to add customers onto the network in order to make the business case turn a corner and start to break even. So we delivered under 2 HNIP phases. Phase 2 was essentially everything on the kind of left-hand side of the screen, going towards about 5 major corporate buildings. And then phase 3 was a series of small extensions to clusters of customers, where by joining them together, we were able to strategically oversize pipes and serve a range of customers, and then have onward connections to allow future growth. So our phase 2 was around about £2.5 million of HNIP investment. It took place between September 2019 and then early 21. The innovative thing about that project was that we were doing a major piece of public realm work. We closed the main bus route through the city centre in order to completely transform the street scene. So we worked really hard to make sure that we got as much to a line as we could. So we worked about 2 to 4 weeks ahead of the public transport project to drop pipe in the ground and then allow them to come along and do their work just behind us. It was incredibly fraught, incredibly hard work, but the impact on the city was brilliant in that we closed a major road once. And we did that kind of Carlsberg of utilities, where we dug a hole, we put pipes in the ground, and then somebody came along and resurfaced it after us. So it was a really nice integrated piece of work, and allowed us to work in a really difficult, busy city centre in a way that allowed us to minimise the impact on the people of Leeds. Phase 3 was very different in that we had these 5 small extensions, so we were able to work quite effectively in a way that just allowed us to work around the other construction projects taking place in the city. We're able to change the sequencing of works to minimise the impact on the city centre. But the great thing was that it allowed us to open up a number of sites where new private developers were operating, and we've now got, I think, 3 major new private sector residential developments connected to the network. From having done this work, we've now got about 2,000 flats, about a dozen commercial sites connected, and we are now negotiating with about 40 additional sites to connect. So the key thing that we said to our decision makers was that if we build this network, they will come, and it's now interesting to see that's coming true. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of some of the customers we've got connected on. It's a range of new and old buildings in a range of different sectors, from developers to education, government, healthcare, and of course housing. So next slide, please. Picking up on the lessons that we've learned across the 4 years that we've been kind of operating this network. The thing that became very clear about 1.5 years ago was that having energy from our main energy source being energy from waste just allowed us to decouple from the energy shocks that were hitting most of the industry. So our heat is indexed with RPI. So gas prices doubled, tripled. Ours went up by about 7% in 1 year and 10% in the next. So having that low carbon heat source that isn't a major utility is a huge benefit for a network. So really important to look at where industrial waste heat is available in a city. Another main lesson that's come our way is that developers now really highly value decarbonised heat. So there's very few developers who are looking to push ahead with a gas development now. They're all really looking at heat pumps or district heating. And district heating tends to outperform heat pumps in pretty much every circumstance. So it's a much easier sell than it was just 3 or 4 years back. We found that government policy is very consistent, very supportive. We've had a number of really supportive policy developments over the last few years, from taking away the what's it called, business rates on district heating. That was a real boon for us and allowed us to move towards break even more quickly. And then things like zoning and regulation are also really supportive. I think zoning's a massive game-changing opportunity. I'll touch on that in just a second. Another thing we've picked up is that local authorities don't have to directly lead. We took the decision to own and operate the network. If I had my time again, we probably would go down a joint venture route from the beginning as a way to bring in additional private sector investment and tie the private sector partner more directly into the work that we're doing. But district heating has created a massively positive story in the city. We've had articles on BBC Look North and Calendar and a whole host of print media stories. All of them are very positive, lots of interest, and politicians love it. They really get the benefits that this is bringing to the people of Leeds. Question is, would we do it again? Next slide, please. Yes, we would. We're now working on our phase 4 network. Next slide again. We've got an application in for Green Heat Network fund support for 2 areas. One's a small extension similar to our phase 3. The other one's a very major extension into the South Bank. This is about a £60 million scheme connecting into a glass factory operated by Veralia, taking waste heat from that with an interconnection over a river back into the Leeds pipe network to make sure we provide that resilience to both elements of the network. We're also looking at getting heat from data centres to provide the additional low carbon heat in different points. So it's a hugely beneficial scheme, and the reason we're now able to kind of step up to this sort of scale is from all the experience we've got from successfully delivering our phases 1, 2, and 3. And then just the final slide, please, is just looking ahead to the future. So we've been part of the heat network zoning pilots and the advanced zoning programme, which is looking to accelerate the growth of heat networks through zoning. So this slide here just shows our main network in orange in the centre. The South Bank is outlined in purple, and then there's a grey area down to the southeast, which is another energy from waste district heating network that SSE are developing. And then the overall kind of orange zone is the indicative zone that we need that we could designate within the city. Estimates are that it's about 650 gigawatt hours of heat demand, 175 kilometres of network, 650 million pounds of investment. To put it in context, we currently supply about 30 gigawatt hours of heat. So we're talking about something which is orders of magnitude bigger than the network that we've already delivered. But again, building on the experience that we've got today, we think we've got the right partnership in place to help us to deliver this really ambitious and game-changing network. So I'll leave it there.
Great, thanks, George. Over to Jo to talk about the Mersey Heat scheme in Liverpool.
Thank you. So now I'm following 2 hard presentations, so slight difference here. So my name is Jo Longdon. I'm a director of Ener-Vate, so we're district heating developers, and I'm here today to talk about Mersey Heat, which we develop on behalf of PLNRE. So next slide, please. So the scheme itself was originally set up to supply low carbon heat to the Liverpool Waters development, and which is a large regeneration project on the Mersey. We started looking at, okay, what was the best solution to decarbonise the network? We looked at heat pumps. We looked at aquifers, air source heat pumps, sewage heat pumps. We've looked at lots and lots of things. And obviously having a huge water source next to the development, it led us down the path of water source heat pump. One of the things we looked at in addition to the Liverpool Waters is, okay, what else is around the network? Who else would like to be interested in connecting? And that's when we started considering existing buildings that were in close proximity. But once the Mersey Heat network is fully built out, the intention is it will supply all of Liverpool Waters, which is around 9,000 homes, 4 million square feet of commercial space, and as I say, some of these existing buildings which I'll come on to. Next slide, please. So this area here shows the extent, if you like, of the Mersey Heat network. So all of the light pinky buildings are planned new developments, and the browny colour are existing buildings that are not within Peel ownership necessarily, but are in close proximity to the network. The dark black box, it's probably a bit small to see, just north of the Stanley Dock, that is the energy centre location. It's called Great Howard Street location. It's a piece of land that is owned by Peel, right next to the railway line, and that is where the main energy centre is being constructed. So we actually take, we abstract water from the canal and we discharge into the docks. Next slide, please. So we were successful in 2 awards. One of the very early ones, it seems so long ago now and sort of pre-COVID, but the HNIP one. And this was around, we recognised that we needed to put in some infrastructure early to achieve the requirements of the network. And the main reason for this is, as I've just pointed out, Great Howard Street is on Great Howard Street, but it's a little bit away from the main development, and it's also a little bit away from the water. So we were having to navigate ourselves through some highways works, which was the main routes were already going through for resurfacement, and they're the main routes into Liverpool, so not ones that you can easily just close off again. They were putting an embargo on, which meant that once those roads were open and closed, we weren't allowed to go back in for 5 years, and we knew then that would cause us a challenge in order to be able to get to the main energy centre to supply the network. So the first award was to enable some of those early road crossings and linking some of the pipe work together that we'd already started to put into the ground. We were led by a number of developments that were happening in and around the area, and we'll come on to lessons learned later on, but that did mean a bit of a piecemeal delivery of pipe work, which you wouldn't necessarily choose if you were going to do this in the future. The second award, a bit bigger, this was to help us decarbonise the network, because originally, the way back when, this was going to be a gas CHP scheme, as most district heat networks were. And then obviously with the changes around what developers were requiring for the new build developments, but also what clients were starting to request in terms of decarbonisation, moving away from gas, we started to look at the water source heat pump. So the second fund was to help us with that and the economics of making this scheme work. Next slide, please. So in terms of progress and what we've done against those awards, so we managed to install the DM400, the biggest pipes that we've got on our network. So we oversized them. So they're slightly oversized for the need that we had, but we always knew there'd be some future expansion. Once people started to, a bit like George's comment, of build it, they will come. A lot of people now show interest, and we're so lucky that we did oversize those pipes, because otherwise we wouldn't have had the capacity to supply. We managed to do the construction pieces under Regent Road and Great Howard Street ahead of the 5-year embargo. We ended up actually tunnelling under Great Howard Street significantly to avoid other services, which is quite costly, bit of a headache, but it's done and it's buried and it's in. And we also installed the pre-insulated pipework, which joined up some of the earlier pipe that we'd managed to put into Princess Parade at Liverpool. Next slide, please. So HNIP 2, where are we with this one? Well, we're making good speed now. We had a bit of a delay. There was lots of delays. Everybody had delays around COVID and everything else. We've had lots of delays with managing to get easements and approvals, because obviously this isn't a council scheme. It's slightly different in the fact that it's a third party bringing it forward. But nevertheless, we've made good progress now. So the water source heat pump's fully designed. We've actually placed the order and it's being delivered in April. So you'll see some more press releases. I'm all about making this press release, this water source delivery. I'm probably building it up way too much from an engineering point of view, but it's quite a big thing for the Northwest to have a 3 megawatt heat pump delivered. So there'll be more press releases coming through on that. We've done all of the in SI, and that threw us some challenges again, even down to when we started construction of the energy centre, more challenges because of its contaminated landing areas, and we've had to do some cleaning up. But again, we've worked through it. But one of the lessons learned that we'll come to at the end is probably about George's point is you never really know until you start digging what you're going to find. We've got full planning permission and the energy centre is already in construction. We hope to have heat on November 24 this year from that water source heat pump and have a fully working energy centre which will supply heat to some of the buildings we've currently got on a temporary heat supply. Part of the HNIP2 award was to start looking at the extension, if you like, past the new build to some of the existing buildings that were quite close in proximity. This area is the Three Graces area, so large existing buildings, and we've managed to complete the REBA 3 design on that as well. And we've been having really positive engagement with some of those customers, and hopefully, fingers crossed for some successful PSDS funding, we may be able to connect those in the early 25. Next slide, please. So schemes like this aren't just about delivering a heat network for a few buildings. There's so many wider benefits, and I think with all the zoning and the regulation changes, these schemes will come into their own as being those first starter schemes, if you like. But this scheme in itself is of significant scale when you look at it. But we future-proof the scheme, like I say, low carbon. We're already looking at other sources of heat that may be able to feed into that network as it grows. Currently in the design, it saves around 4,200 tonnes of carbon against, once it's at full build, against an equivalent of gas, so a significant amount. Our D-Bond partner, which is Vital Energy on this scheme, they've managed to secure over 40 apprentices, and they work on a rotation basis. So a lot of them are getting some exposure to this scheme, and they'll go on, obviously, therefore, to spread that into the industry. And it goes on, but there's lots of opportunities for expansion. There's a construction hub. The Liverpool College brought forward a construction hub actually on the Liverpool Water site, and the intention there is to bridge that gap between training and employment. So again, that's going to be utilised more so now the construction's happening at Liverpool, so people can see actually this is what we talk about when we learn in college, and this is the reality of delivering networks on site. Next slide, please. So the lessons learned. There you can see underground risk, that is the DN 400s that go under around 6 meters down under Great Howard Street. And that's how deep we had to go. So first of all, we had the issue to deal with of we couldn't go across the road because of the current works. But then we had to go under the road, and we had to keep going under and under and under and deeper because of various different reasons when we looked into the ground risk, but also because we had to avoid existing services. So one of the main sewage pipes runs through that that road as well. We've encountered quite a few. I could give you stories after story. I've probably like George says, I've got the scars as well for ground risk. But this is what you get when you're developing and regeneration sites that are old dockland. We have all sorts to deal with: unexploded bombs. We have contamination. There's all sorts buried in Liverpool docks, as there is in lots of other docks, as you can imagine. But ground risk is a big risk, and you need to manage that contractually. Really get into the contractual piece on that if you're doing this. Engagement. So we've done a lot of engagement with as many stakeholders as we can. And I think prior to this last year, a lot of people have sort of said, oh, yeah, well, if it happens, we'll look to connect. Will it happen, etc., etc. Now they can start to see things are happening and there's pipe in the ground and the energy centres being constructed. And developers are starting to say, well, actually, if this gets built, this could actually save me a headache because I've got a low carbon network in the service roads. Then we're starting to see a lot more engagement from people. But previously, it has been a challenge, and it's been a bit of a journey to come through. engagement and time sort of fit together in the fact that if you are liaising with third parties, and that could be councils, it could be other landowners, it could be environmental bodies, because a lot of obviously the low carbon sources, give yourself a lot of time, because these things don't happen overnight. And whilst everybody is working towards the same goal and the new regulations and legislation will help that, it still takes a lot of time. So for us, I would say when developing any heat network, other than the ground risk, which you can contractually deal with, engagement and time are the things that you really need to pay a lot of focus to. Next slide, please. And that's enough from me. Like I say, these projects, they've took so many twists and turns over the last 4 years, and we could probably talk about them all day, but that's hopefully giving you a little bit of a snapshot into it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Well, it's nice to see that you're all still working in the sector, so those scars can't be too bad then. Jo, I might start the Q&A session back with you just because you've just finished your presentation. I think I'll probably ask all of you a question a little bit more on that kind of wider stakeholder engagement. So my lovely partner is from Liverpool, so I know that they're very proud people, and I know that that Dockland area is a huge sort of historical hub. I've been to a wedding at the Titanic Hotel. I know that it's lovely. How have you managed sort of, and I guess you've got the Three Graces buildings as well. I can't remember which one's which, but I know that there's kind of grade 1, grade 2 listed. How have you managed sort of integrating that kind of old historical legacy with the kind of new technology of the heat network?
Okay, so there's some technical challenges with existing buildings, which everybody I'm sure is aware of, but just to give a few, like you say, some of them are protected buildings. So when you're thinking about where your pipe runs need to be and your entry points into buildings, and will it be seen? I mean, the good thing about district heating, most of it's buried, so you don't have that much on show. So out of some of the other technologies, it's probably the most favoured from an aesthetics point of view. However, you've got the temperatures. A lot of the old buildings are still running on really high temperatures. Now, luckily for us and everybody on this call, our networks are designed to run at a higher temperature with the thoughts of retrofit in mind. Some of the new build district heat schemes that we're seeing around the country are designed on a much lower temperature, so therefore that will bring different challenges. The biggest thing for us has been education. Everybody we speak to, whether that be a new build developer and how it would work for them, whether it be an energy manager who's been managing his gas boiler plant in an old building for 5-10 years and understanding the differences there, massively on education, but also then supporting on changes that might need to be in the building. So using some of our partners to assist with changes that can happen within the buildings that might not cost a lot of money, but just need some technical tweaks, and therefore to make it more compatible. And then the carbon benefits and the cost savings usually then help with the persuasion of why it's a good idea to connect to a heat network.
I was just thinking then, I think part of it is that persuasion, isn't it? A lot of the people that I guess that you're dealing with in those buildings that are managing them perhaps don't necessarily have the knowledge that we've got of the market and the kind of intentions of what these networks are doing. I wonder if, George, I'll go on to you. I wonder if that education piece is also really important for Leeds. I remember one of the big things we had with the Leeds pipe schemes and your kind of applications was that COVID time. I think we had a call with you, and actually everyone sort of having to stay at home meant that you'd managed to pick up pace on the network and kind of areas that you'd perhaps fallen behind in, just because we know construction projects don't necessarily always work to time. You'd actually managed to pull yourselves back. How, in terms of the general public awareness, and you've also said yourself that there's been a lot of positive news stories, sort of what's the key to that success? Sort of, I've been to Leeds, I'd seen all the kind of the boards and things like that, and it just feels like the general public are really behind this. Is there something that you think you've done to sort of really support that and engage them on that journey?
So yeah, so our phase 2 kicked off September 2019, and then 6 months later COVID hit, which meant everyone disappeared from the city centre, and what would have been a real nightmare to get through certain roads became a very easy project to deliver. But the thing that we have learned most about district heating in a busy city centre, where it is to understand that there's a whole range of other conflicting, competing demands on the road network. So in Leeds, we've got something called Connecting Leeds, which has been doing a huge amount of work to change public transport, lots of public realm work. So there's been key bits of the highways infrastructure which have been closed since about 2018 on a rolling basis. So what we've had to do is just work really closely with our highways colleagues well in advance of doing anything with district heating, just to say we plan to close these particular roads at this particular time and see how they react. Often we've got a really good relationship with them, but often they'll just say, yeah, you can't do it then, but if you take it forward 3 months or push it back 6 months, then that becomes workable. And by doing that, we've just managed to hugely minimize the disruption in the city, because people are used to construction projects happening all the time. There's cranes, there's roads closed, there's stuff happening, whether it's gas, electricity, other utilities, construction companies. So actually district heating is kind of lost in the general mix of construction. But the thing that would create issues is if we cause particular problems for people trying to travel. So by doing this kind of forward planning, we've managed to cut down on disruption. We always work very hard to let people know who are going to be directly impacted, so those kind of surrounding the construction works. We've done work to minimise the kind of dust and noise and other kind of environmental nasties that come out of doing, you know, trenching in a city centre. But yeah, forward planning. I think that's the critical message I'll put for trying to bring public with you.
And it's quite, I can see the sort of similarities with the work in Liverpool in terms of, I think it's very easy for us to get blinkered in, this is the heat network project, this is what it's going to do, but then it actually is that partnership with, it's kind of a can of worms, isn't it? The partnership with all the other organisations. Similar to Liverpool, you've got the Great Howard Street Transport Works. Actually, it's trying to piece everything together so that all of those works can come together in a nice pattern. Jim, one for you, and I know that this is one that we always pick up on, and just keen to understand a little bit more now that kind of works have progressed a lot further. We obviously love to play on the idea of the legacy coal mines for Gateshead. What's kind of been the general public response to that? I know obviously a lot in Gateshead, there's even families there now who probably have older relatives who still worked in the coal mines back when they were open. Kind of, again, that stakeholder, general public engagement, how have you managed that messaging to them?
Yeah, I guess it's been, we've been, you know, we didn't expect this, but I think certainly in politicians and that kind of sector, they've completely bought into the fact that we are repurposing, you know, what was a polluting legacy into something that's now generating renewable heat, and that's really helped sort of like sell and allow us to push this and deliver it internally when we, you know, we didn't know if it was achievable at the start, but we started on a journey and we gradually increased our cost and risk exposure, and we delivered it. I think the construction was fairly straightforward because we were in a fairly industrial stroke brownfield area. There wasn't massive impact on the community, and equally there wasn't that much engagement needed at that point. But where we are finding it's really important is, like George has found, you know, when you start impacting people's lives through, you know, putting the network in that's going to connect them to it, that's when we started to rely on, you know, then bringing in the information about the source it is, and that's where it resonates with local people, in that they have got, you know, a grandfather or grandparents that worked in the pit cafe or worked down the pit, and that just helps, you know, that just helps manage the short-term disruption when you do take the pipe past someone's house. And that's key. And I think, you know, longer term, the other reason it resonates is because regardless of the source, our objective is to try and take low cost, low carbon heat to residents regardless of their economic status. And that's what we find in Gateshead, is that, you know, people, you know, there's a section that can afford to buy their own heat pump, but, you know, the majority of our social housing estates, and even the right to buy is in that's not the position. And so we're pushing the fact that having made this investment and tapping these sources, it's allowing to basically, you know, allow us to take green energy to all customers, not just those who can afford it.
And actually, I guess that's the same message for kind of any project, isn't it? Across England, Wales, Scotland, wherever you want to look, it's actually just that ability to get low carbon heat to everyone and anyone that you can.
Yeah.
Sam, I wasn't sure if there were any other questions that came through. I'm happy to hand over to you if you've seen some pop through.
So we haven't had any through. So whilst our attendees are having a think about a question, I've got one for each of the speakers as well. If you had one key message to somebody embarking on a heat network project, what would it be?
And
don't say don't do it.
I was going to say do it. Yeah, I think we have found the positives outweigh the negatives just by an enormous amount. I think that the fundamental is trying to find that good quality low carbon heat source. If you can find a good quality low carbon heat source, then everything else can grow from that, because it allows you to provide the lower cost, lower carbon heat. And once you've got that, you've got a project which will work, it will be attractive, and it will then help to build that experience that then everything else grows from. Certainly our experience was we did some very small district heating projects before we embarked on the Leeds Pipes major project, and we just learned a bit from that. We got some more political support, we got some more senior officer support from doing that. So pick something and do it. But the critical thing is do it. I think
I'd add to that as well, and the key is there are a lot of risks in delivering these networks, particularly around the construction element. And from what George and Joe said about you don't know what you find till you get under the ground, and so it's not just learning about the technical parts of it's learning about the contracting and managing your design build contractor, your O&M contractor. And we've had good contractors, we've had less good contractors, and so I think I would always say start with a small viable network to cut your teeth on, to learn what procurement route works for you, because George was right, the earlier you go to the market, the more you'll pay for it. And so there's a real benefit from being an intelligent client and taking it as far as you can, that that your legal and finance colleagues will let you go, to then de-risk it, so that when you do go to the market, you've got a much more constrained scheme, and then the market, whether they're building it or operating it, they're going to price it more accordingly, because you've taken that some of the risk out, and then you've got less to worry about when you are then managing as a contractor going in.
No, agreed. I think just building on both of those, I mean, would we do it? We do it all over the UK. I'm working on about 20, 30 schemes at the moment. I think one of the key things is learn from. There's a lot of expertise now. I mean, you've got three of us on the call today, but there's also a lot of expertise. More and more people have been through the pain. You don't all need to go back through the pain. Learn from people that have done it and what worked well and what didn't, like sessions like this. But also, I think there is it's quite a niche market still, and obviously we're doing more to try and expand out. So there's more consultants, there's more providers of technology, there's more installers, but there's still a lot of expertise out there. So use what is out there. Like you say, try and de-risk it as much as you can up front. It not only cuts your installation times down and your project delivery times down, but also that means that you go into the market with exactly what you want, because the more ambiguity there is, the more difficult it is to actually get something that fits. But key thing is, it takes time, but surround yourself with the right people and you will get there, and then it will be worth it. Particularly as now we're starting to move into this new world of new legislation and regulation. I think they will definitely support the delivery of these networks that we didn't quite have a few years ago.
Great, thanks everyone. We've had a question through from Andrew. He said he'd be interested to understand, Jim, from your perspective, how you're engaging with the potential customers in individual homes. It's not a particularly common situation across the UK at the moment, but I expect that a lot of networks moving forward are going to have to start talking to individual households.
Yes, so I guess obviously it's more straightforward when you're dealing with new build, because you're interfacing with a developer, but even then you still have to take those developers on a journey to then get them on board, so that then you're in a position to provide those customer packs for those new entrants. That's probably more standard. When we are going to existing customers, We've tried and failed to do schemes which are largely private sector or private owner-occupier led. They've been a lot more challenging because there's a lot more risk in that, and so that's why we've changed tack to focus on our social housing areas, because then as landlord we can make the decision about what heating plant they get. We still need to then do that engagement, and so that's part of the first 500 homes we're going to do. The Ener-Vate UK funding is providing extra resource to provide engagement support through partners such as Northumbria University, who are doing some questionnaire and some social profiling, and also some just basically simple just learning for customers to understand the difference between a heat network and a heat pump, so they can make engaged and informed decisions. And so basically, we're starting through that process. We've done like George's, we've done lots of high rise before, and if anything, when high rise has been a bit more straightforward, because often you're going from electric storage heaters to a new modern controllable system. So we've done that, and it just 99% acceptance and satisfaction. That's fine. It's a little bit different when you're taking someone's boiler out and replacing it with an HIU. But that's why, again, we're not going to do it cold. We're resourcing the engagement process so far and targeting our own stock and that, so we can prove it on our stock before we then take it into the private sector, again, for private owner occupiers.
Great, thank you, Jim.
But they did it in Scandinavia, so so it will happen here.
Yeah, definitely. It's been really, really interesting to see the updates from all of you. Thank you so much for your time. I don't think there's any other questions from our attendees, so I think we'll probably wrap it up there. Once again, thanks everyone for joining. If you're not yet on our mailing list, please ensure you sign up. If you have any questions or anything comes to mind over the next couple of weeks, please do feel free to email us and we can pass your questions over to the relevant person. And do follow us on social media, and you can find out what's going on across HNIP and the Green Heat Network Fund. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.